Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into a corner of history that textbooks never dared to reveal. Have you ever wondered what the real life of ancient Egyptian elites was like, beyond the grand pyramids and solemn rituals? Imagine yourself, a young archaeologist stumbling upon a mysterious papyrus scroll, not a curse, but an invitation. An invitation to a love festival in Thebes, an event every historian conveniently overlooked. Sounds insane, right? Trust me, that's just the beginning. You'll step into a world where venerable priests are dog paddling in artificial temple pools, where barley beer isn't just for drinking, but a potent truth serum for dark secrets, and where the gods themselves aren't merely worshipped, but are living caricatures of the very power-hungry individuals vying for control. Behind every curtain, every forced smile, lie political bargains, insidious plots, and dangerous promises. Do you have the courage to uncover the truth? Or will you be swallowed by the vortex of secrets buried for millennia? So, dim the lights, pull up a cozy blanket, and let's peel back the layers of the past. If you're ready for an unimaginable adventure, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss other forbidden tales, and don't forget to comment where in the world you're tuning in from. Ready? Because once you step into this sanctuary, there's no turning back.
The stone wall screeched. Not a gentle crumble, but a dry, grating crack, like the very bones of a pharaoh shattering after millennia. Dust exploded, blinding you, choking you, filling your lungs with the ancient dead. Your heart hammered against your ribs, a frantic drum in the suffocating silence of the unmapped tomb. This wasn't a natural collapse. This was a deliberate shift, a hidden mechanism groaning to life, revealing a dark, secret niche. And there it was, nestled perfectly within the newly exposed cavity, a small, tightly rolled papyrus scroll, seemingly waiting for you, its existence a direct challenge to every archaeological textbook you'd ever read. Not a curse, not a funerary text, no grand declarations of eternal rest, just faded glyphs promising something utterly, scandalously else. Your fingers, calloused from years of delicate excavation, trembled as they carefully unrolled the brittle parchment. The hieroglyphs, usually so formal, so stoic, almost danced on the page, imbued with a strange, vibrant energy. As you translated, the words unfurled, surprisingly colloquial, almost cheeky. It wasn't a sacred decree from a long-dead pharaoh. It was an invitation to a love festival at some obscure ancient temple in Thebes. Seriously? A love festival in ancient Egypt? It felt like a cosmic joke played across millennia, a prank from a mischievous deity like Thoth himself. But then again, what archaeologist, fueled by caffeine and an insatiable curiosity, could possibly resist a mystery wrapped in a riddle, tied with a bow of such glorious absurdity? Your pulse, usually a steady thrum in the quiet of the tomb, began to tap a frantic rhythm against your ribs, a war drum of impending adventure. The invitation, despite its flippant tone, contained unnervingly precise details. The name of a highly reputable high priest of Amun, a man whose existence was confirmed in countless official records, and the exact coordinates of a lesser-known temple, one rarely mentioned in the grand scrolls of history. It was too specific to be a simple hoax, too intricately woven with verifiable facts to be mere graffiti. A shiver colder than the tomb air, traced its way down your spine. This wasn't just old paper. It was a direct message, a whisper from the past, echoing in your present, demanding attention like a demanding toddler in a royal court. You considered it, this bizarre summons, like a modern-day email from a long-lost relative, inviting you to a family reunion you never knew existed, but somehow felt compelled to attend.
Then your eyes caught it, a small, almost imperceptible symbol tucked away in the corner of the papyrus. A snake, coiled elegantly around a lotus blossom. You'd seen it before, tucked into the margins of other scrolls, always dismissed by your esteemed colleagues as a mere decorative flourish, a doodle by a bored scribe. But now, under the tomb's flickering light, it pulsed with a new meaning, a subtle, almost imperceptible glow. It felt like a secret handshake, a forgotten cipher that had existed for millennia, waiting for someone, for you, to finally crack it. This wasn't just an invitation, it was a key, a direct portal to a hidden world, a secret history waiting to be unlocked. You spent the next few days holed up in your cramped apartment in Luxor, the desert heat a constant oppressive blanket. Stacks of papyrus rolls and dusty tomes became your only companions as you frantically searched for any mention of a love festival in Thebes. Nothing. Not a single hieroglyph, not a single obscure reference in any scholarly text. It was as if this particular event had been erased from the annals of history, conveniently overlooked by generations of Egyptologists, a ghost in the machine of ancient records. The more you searched, the deafening silence of the historical records screamed at you, pulling you deeper into the enigma. It was louder than any trumpet blast, a siren call to the unknown, a whisper of forbidden knowledge. Rereading the invitation for the 10th time, the sheer audacity and humor of the ancient scribe truly shone through. It wasn't formal, stiff, or filled with the usual pomp of royal decrees. Instead, it read with a casual familiarity, almost like an old friend sending a text message. "Hey, we're having a thing. Come hang out. It'll be wild. Don't be a square." The juxtaposition of its ancient origins and its modern conversational tone was jarring, yet utterly captivating. It felt like the papyrus itself was winking at you, sharing a private joke across the vast expanse of time, a cosmic inside joke only you were privy to. You couldn't help but chuckle, a strange, almost sacrilegious sound in the quiet of your apartment, a sound that felt both rebellious and deeply satisfying.
You made a cautious call to your colleague, Dr. Eleanor Vance, an expert in funerary texts and a woman whose academic reputation loomed like a granite obelisk over your burgeoning career. You carefully omitted the love festival part, focusing only on the rare and unusual papyrus you'd found. Her skepticism, as predictable as the rising of the Nile, was a cold splash of reality. A new text, without a proper context? Sounds like a forgery, dear. If you continue chasing these fantastical notions, I fear your opportunities for official excavation grants will dry up faster than the desert floor. Her dismissive tone, a familiar tune in the academic symphony, only solidified your resolve. If the experts couldn't explain it, then perhaps it was something truly extraordinary, something too wild for their dusty textbooks, too grand for their limited imaginations. That night, sleep was a distant mirage, a cruel trick of the desert heat. You lay awake, the scroll clutched in your hand, the weight of a civilization resting on your palm, a burden as heavy as a sarcophagus lid. On one side, the safe, predictable path of a respectable academic, publishing papers on tomb architecture and pottery shards, a life of quiet, scholarly dignity. On the other, the tantalizing pull of a secret, a truth that could rewrite everything you thought you knew about ancient Egypt, a truth that promised danger and unparalleled discovery. It was a classic dilemma, a fork in the road of destiny, and your inner compass was spinning like a drunken dervish, pointing wildly in every direction. The choice was clear, yet terrifying, a leap of faith into the unknown.
You knew, deep down, that to refuse this invitation would be to betray the very essence of what made you an archaeologist. It wasn't just about digging up bones and broken pots. It was about chasing whispers, unearthing forgotten stories, and daring to believe in the impossible. This papyrus wasn't just a document, it was a key, a direct portal to a hidden world, a secret history waiting to be unlocked, a Pandora's box of ancient scandal. Your destiny, it seemed, was not to merely observe history, but to become a part of its most scandalous footnotes, a silent witness to the untold tales of the pharaohs. You packed in silence, your movements precise, almost ritualistic, leaving behind a single forgotten pen on your desk, a small testament to your haste. No farewells, no explanations, just a quiet, determined departure, like a thief stealing away with the sunrise, leaving only questions in your wake. The taxi rumbled through the dusty streets of Luxor, the ancient temples looming in the pre-dawn light, their colossal forms watching like silent sentinels. As you stepped out, the cool desert air kissed your face, carrying with it the faint scent of sand and secrets. You stood before the towering pylons of the temple, a silhouette against the awakening sky, a lone figure on the precipice of history. A question as old as the pyramids themselves echoed in your mind. Does this era even exist? Or am I about to step into a dream, a mirage of the past?
The colossal temple gates, carved with the stern, unblinking eyes of ancient gods, loomed before you, a maw of silent stone. You pushed, and with a groan that seemed to echo from the very bedrock of Egypt, they grudgingly yielded. Not ominously, no, but with a weary sigh, as if they'd seen too many secrets, too many forbidden entries to bother with dramatic flair. The air hit you first, a thick, almost palpable haze of frankincense and stale barley beer, a cloying embrace of sanctity and debauchery. Your heart, still a frantic drum from the journey, pounded a chaotic rhythm against your ribs. This was it, the forbidden sanctuary. You expected hushed reverence, solemn chants, perhaps a pharaoh's ghost. Instead, the first thing you saw was a group of high priests of Amun, their ceremonial robes hiked up around their knees, splashing like overgrown children in a shallow, artificial pool. They weren't praying, they were dog paddling, hooting and splashing water at each other, their solemn, painted faces contorted in expressions of pure, unadulterated glee. Was this a sacred ritual, or just a giant, roofed-over frat house? This was not in any textbook, not even in the footnotes. One ancient priest, his face a canvas of intricate coal and ceremonial paint, his bald head gleaming under the temple's diffused light, paddled towards you. He looked like a living, breathing hieroglyph, but one that had clearly just won a swimming race. He didn't ask for your name, didn't offer a ritualistic greeting, didn't even bother with a solemn nod. Instead, a wide, beer-stained grin split his face. "Welcome, archaeologist," he rasped, his voice surprisingly deep, like gravel rolling down a pyramid. "Can you swim, or are you only good at reading dead things?" You blinked. A direct hit. Was this a test? A bizarre initiation? Or had you simply stumbled into the world's oldest, most exclusive frat house, where the hazing involved ancient water sports? The scent of incense, usually so calming, now felt like a heavy cloak trying to smother the chaotic reality unfolding before your eyes, a perfumed shroud over pandemonium. The temple interior, vast and echoing, was a sensory overload, a symphony of the absurd. The cloying sweetness of frankincense, meant to purify, was aggressively battling the pungent yeasty tang of barley beer and the unmistakable earthy smell of sweat. It was a battleground of aromas, a jarring juxtaposition of the sacred and the spectacularly profane. You could practically taste the tension between spiritual devotion and pure, unadulterated indulgence, a bitter cocktail of piety and pleasure. This wasn't the hushed reverence you'd read about in ancient texts. This was a cacophony of contradictions, a living, breathing paradox. Every breath felt like inhaling 1,000 years of secrets and 1,000 gallons of fermented grain, a heady brew of history and hedonism.
It quickly became clear. This temple wasn't a place of worship. It was a stage, a grand theater of power. Every priest, every official, even the seemingly random servants had a role, meticulously planned and flawlessly executed. The high priest of Amun wasn't just a spiritual leader. He was the master of ceremonies, the ringleader of this ancient circus. From the robed figures meticulously pouring beer from massive amphorae, their movements precise as surgeons, to the ones plucking at harps with surprising gusto, each was a cog in a finely tuned machine. This wasn't some spontaneous gathering. It was a performance art piece, centuries in the making, and you, the bewildered archaeologist, had just bought the front row ticket, a seat in the greatest show on earth. The music echoing through the vast halls wasn't the somber, rhythmic chanting you'd expected. Oh no, it was a lively, almost raucous melody, a tune that made your feet itch to tap along, a siren song of revelry. You spotted another priest, his elaborate linen headdress slightly askew, strumming a lyre with the wild abandon of a street musician at a modern-day festival. The notes, far from being solemn hymns, sounded suspiciously like something you'd heard at a village celebration, perhaps even a drinking song, a forbidden melody in a sacred space. The very walls seemed to vibrate with this unexpected joy, a rebellious symphony against the weight of millennia, a defiant roar against the silence of history. You tried to maintain an air of scholarly detachment, a professional poker face, but it was a losing battle. Your lips twitched. A full-blown chuckle threatened to erupt when you saw another venerable priest known for his eloquent philosophical treatises, wrestling a particularly plump fish from the artificial pond with his bare hands. He looked less like a man of letters and more like a desperate fisherman, grunting with effort, his dignity evaporating like morning dew in the desert sun. This was the kind of scene that would get you laughed out of any academic conference. Yet here, it was just Tuesday, another day in paradise, Egyptian style.
In a shadowed corner, away from the splashing and the music, you noticed a high official, his linen kilt pristine, whispering intently with a robed priest. You braced yourself for hushed political intrigue, for discussions of troop movements or treasury deficits. Instead, you caught fragments of their conversation. Quote, "More hops, less barley, a touch of honey, perhaps. The crocodile in the upper Nile, he's been looking unwell. And the silt from the last flood, not as rich as promised. Our granaries, they're feeling it." A sudden chill, colder than the tomb air, ran down your spine. They weren't just discussing a new beer recipe. This was their secret language, a culinary cipher for political secrets. The crocodile was a powerful official in the south, perhaps facing a downfall. The silt referred to vital resources now dwindling, threatening the very stability of the kingdom. You were decoding their world, one fermented grain at a time. A servant, moving with the silent grace of a desert fox, offered you a cup. The beer was surprisingly potent, a rich, malty brew that warmed you from the inside out, a liquid fire in your belly. And then it happened. Not drunkenness, not exactly, but a strange clarity. Your senses sharpened, like a hawk's eyes suddenly seeing every grain of sand in the vast desert. The laughter of the priests, once a meaningless din, now seemed to carry layers of hidden meaning, a chorus of coded messages, each giggle a veiled threat, each guffaw a hidden agenda. You began to perceive the subtle shifts in the air, the almost imperceptible movements on the wall paintings that seemed to tell stories beyond their static forms, a silent movie of ancient conspiracies.
Another priest, his eyes twinkling with a mischievous glint, approached you. He gestured towards a colossal statue of Ra, the sun god, its face usually so stern and unyielding. "Old Ra," he drawled, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "He liked his beer too, you know, just not as much as we do. He had to keep up appearances, unlike us lucky mortals." It was a casual remark, almost blasphemous, yet it humanized the divine, bringing the gods down to the level of common revelers. This wasn't about Ra's majesty. It was about Ra's thirst, a divine thirst that mirrored their own, a shared weakness across the cosmic divide. As the chapter drew to a close, the bizarre reality of the situation solidified. This wasn't just a party. It was a meticulously orchestrated theatrical production, a grand illusion designed to facilitate something far more important than mere entertainment. It was a sophisticated mechanism for networking, for subtle negotiations, for resolving political disputes under the guise of sacred revelry. Every splash, every song, every shared drink was a step in a larger, unseen dance. You took another deep gulp of the potent beer, its warmth spreading through you. And then a figure emerged from the shadows, a high priest you hadn't seen before, his eyes piercing through the haze. He approached you, a knowing smile playing on his lips, and whispered, "Welcome to the game, friend of Thoth. Now which side will you choose?" The curtain had truly risen, and you were no longer just an observer. You were now a player in their ancient game, whether you liked it or not.
The clay cup, cool against your palm, felt deceptively innocent. The high priest, his face a mask of solemnity that seemed carved from the very stone of the temple, offered it with an ancient, unblinking gaze. "This," he intoned, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor, "is the sacred brew. It cleanses the soul. It expands the vision. Drink and truly see." You took the sip. It wasn't bitter, ceremonial, like medicine. It was a revelation, sweet like dates, tart like pomegranates, and with a surprising kick that warmed your belly instantly, a liquid whisper of forgotten pleasures. You drank again, the potent liquid a river of fire flowing through your veins. Just a few more sips, and the world began to subtly, profoundly shift. Not drunkenness, no, not the clumsy kind that makes you stumble and slur. This was different. Every sense sharpened, like a hawk's eyes suddenly seeing every grain of sand in the vast desert. The cacophony of the party, once a chaotic din, resolved itself into distinct layers. The laughter of the priests, once meaningless, now seemed to carry a strange rhythmic cadence, a series of coded messages that your mind, suddenly unburdened, began to decipher. Was this a divine revelation or just a particularly strong batch of ancient moonshine? A high-pitched cackle from one corner meant the pharaoh's cousin is losing his temper again. A deep, resonant belly laugh from another signaled the grain harvest is looking grim, but don't tell the common folk. You were hearing the secret symphony of their intentions, a chorus of veiled threats and hidden agendas. You glanced at the colossal statues of Horus and Seth, locked in their eternal silent standoff. But now, under the beer's subtle influence, they weren't silent. Horus, the falcon-headed god, winked at you, a mischievous glint in his stone eye, as if sharing an inside joke. Across from him, Seth, the god of chaos, offered a sly, knowing smirk, his stone lips almost curling. They weren't just statues, they were living caricatures, playing out the political drama of the temple, their ancient rivalry a divine chess match unfolding before your newly awakened senses. Then, a low murmur, a guttural grumble seemed to emanate from the base of the towering statue of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the afterlife. You leaned closer, your heart thumping, a drum solo in your chest. Anubis wasn't speaking of death or judgment. No, he was grumbling about numbers, about the sacrificial sheep that mysteriously vanished last month, about the offerings that never quite made it to the temple treasury despite the pharaoh's fervent prayers. The beer had given you the ears of a spy, allowing you to hear the mundane yet utterly damning truths hidden beneath the veneer of sacred ritual. This wasn't just a party, it was a ledger of corruption, whispered by the very gods themselves, a divine audit of illicit gains. A high official, his linen kilt pristine despite the revelry, leaned in conspiratorially, his breath smelling of dates and deceit. He didn't speak of war or statecraft. Instead, he launched into a rambling, exaggerated tale about a pharaoh, long dead, who was famously, hilariously tricked by his own wife into revealing state secrets. She simply asked him, the official whispered, his eyes wide with mock innocence, if his royal scepter was as impressive as his royal decree, and he, bless his simple heart, told her everything. Everyone around him roared with laughter, their faces red with mirth and beer. But you, with your heightened senses, understood. This wasn't just a joke. It was a coded warning, a veiled threat about the dangers of misplaced trust, a cautionary tale disguised as comedy. The laughter was a shield, protecting the sharp political blade hidden beneath, a cacophony of connivance. You realized with a jolt that was both exhilarating and terrifying that the barley beer wasn't merely a drink. It was a lubricant for diplomacy, a social solvent that dissolved the rigid barriers of rank and title. Under its influence, high priests spoke frankly with lowly scribes, and powerful officials shared secrets with seemingly insignificant guests. It was the great equalizer, allowing truths to slip out that would never be uttered in the sober light of day. The temple, once a bastion of strict hierarchy, had become a fluid marketplace of information, all thanks to the potent brew, a liquid network of whispers and deals. You watched a high priest, revered as the voice of Amun-Ra, engage in a hushed conversation with a stern-faced financial official. You expected divine pronouncements, perhaps a discussion of celestial alignments. Instead, you overheard fragments, adjusting the tithes, a slight reallocation of the grain stores from the southern provinces, for the good of the people, of course, and the pharaoh's personal coffers. The beer, you understood, was not just aiding their negotiation, it was sanctifying their corruption, allowing them to adjust ritual terms while secretly siphoning off resources. It was a sacred heist performed with a straight face and a full cup, a divine embezzlement scheme. Across the hall, another priest, younger, with eyes that sparkled like polished obsidian, was attempting to charm a female official. He wasn't using flowery words of love or devotion. Instead, he offered her another cup of the potent brew, his voice a low purr. "Drink this," he murmured, his gaze intense. "You will see the future, all the future you desire. Perhaps a new villa by the Nile, or a more influential position in the Queen's court." It was a blatant pickup line, a seductive weapon disguised as spiritual guidance. The future, he promised, was clearly not of divine enlightenment, but of earthly pleasures, and perhaps a convenient alliance, a liquid promise of power and pleasure.
As you took another sip, a strange, disorienting vision washed over you. Not just a swaying of pillars, but a vivid, chilling glimpse of the future. You saw the Nile, once bountiful, shriveling to a mere trickle, its banks cracked and barren. You saw the granaries, once overflowing, now empty, their gaping mouths screaming famine. Then a pharaoh, not the current one, but a future ruler, crumbling on his throne, his crown askew, his face etched with despair as his kingdom dissolved into chaos. This wasn't just a side effect of the brew. This was a metaphor made manifest, a chilling vision of the Egyptian kingdom itself, listing dangerously under the weight of its own intrigues and hidden agendas, a prophecy whispered by the barley. A figure detached itself from the shadows near a column, a young woman, perhaps an artisan or a musician, her hands stained with vibrant pigments. She met your gaze, her eyes ancient and weary, yet holding a flicker of understanding. "The gods," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper above the revelry. "They only show us what we are willing to see, and sometimes what we are forced to see." She offered a small, knowing smile, then melted back into the crowd, leaving you with her cryptic warning, a fleeting oracle in the chaos. The realization hit you with the force of a sandstorm. This wasn't a love festival at all. It was a covert diplomatic war, fought not with chariots and spears, but with whispered words, coded jokes, and copious amounts of barley beer. The brew was the ultimate truth serum, a tool that allowed the powerful to reveal their true intentions, or at least what they wanted others to believe were their true intentions, without fear of immediate reprisal. You took another deep gulp, the potent liquid burning a path down your throat, a fire of understanding. The game was on, and you were playing to win.
A booming voice, amplified by the temple's acoustics, shook the very foundations of the sanctuary. "Behold, mortals!" a high priest roared, his arms flung wide, his voice a trumpet blast announcing the apocalypse. "Tonight we honor the most magnificent love story of the gods, the eternal devotion of Osiris and Isis." The crowd hushed, eyes fixed on the makeshift stage. You braced yourself for solemnity, for ancient reverence, perhaps even a tear-jerking tragedy. Instead, a figure emerged, draped in linen, but with a slouch that screamed underpaid actor. This was Osiris, and he wasn't looking divine. He shuffled to center stage, cleared his throat, and began to whine, not about death or resurrection, but about Isis being too busy with the kid, Horus. He complained about her never having time for a decent pyramid-building session, his voice a leaky faucet of domestic grievances. Your jaw dropped. This was not the Osiris from the sacred texts. This was Osiris, the disgruntled husband, a deity whose biggest problem seemed to be a messy home life. Was this a sacred ritual, or just a divine reality show? Isis, portrayed by a female priestess whose elaborate wig kept threatening to slide off, appeared next. She didn't weep for her lost love. Oh no. She held a papyrus scroll, a divine to-do list, and began to rattle off a litany of reasons Osiris needed to come back from the dead. Horus needs a father figure. Frankly, he's getting a bit attached to the jackals, she declared, her voice sharp as a newly honed flint knife. And your temple offerings? Falling behind. The cult of Osiris is losing market share. We need you back, darling, for the business. The crowd, surprisingly, nodded in agreement, their faces a mixture of amusement and recognition. This wasn't about love. It was about divine corporate restructuring, a celestial hostile takeover. You felt a laugh bubbling up, a dangerous, sacrilegious sound in this sacred space, a bubble of blasphemy.
Then came Seth, the villain, played by a high official whose smug grin was almost too perfect, a predatory smile etched in stone. He wasn't radiating malice. Instead, he spoke with the casual arrogance of a real estate mogul complaining about his latest acquisition. "Honestly," Seth drawled, gesturing dismissively towards the stage, "managing this desolate desert wasteland is exhausting. And Osiris, with his fertile Nile delta? It's just not fair. I mean, who wouldn't be a little jealous?" He sounded less like a god of chaos and more like a disgruntled sibling complaining about inheritance, his envy a festering wound in the desert sun. The audience chuckled, a knowing conspiratorial sound. You subtly glanced at a powerful vizier in the front row, whose features, particularly his sharp, calculating eyes and thin lips, bore an uncanny resemblance to the actor playing Seth. The vizier caught your eye, and a similar, almost imperceptible smirk flickered across his face, a silent acknowledgment of the mirror. It hit you then, with the force of a chariot impact. Every divine character on this stage was less a god and more a living, breathing caricature of someone in the room, a thinly veiled puppet of the powerful. Osiris, the slightly incompetent but well-meaning figurehead, was likely a stand-in for a recently deceased, perhaps less than stellar pharaoh. Isis, the pragmatic, driven wife, was undoubtedly a mirror for the queen, or a powerful female official navigating the treacherous waters of court politics. And Seth? He was clearly the ambitious, backstabbing vizier, eyeing the throne with the hunger of a desert hyena, his every gesture a dagger aimed at the heart of power. The play wasn't just entertainment. It was a living political cartoon, played out by the very people it satirized, a cruel joke on a grand scale. In one particularly absurd scene, the gods began to argue over the rights to a particularly fertile patch of land near the Nile. Osiris, back from the dead, with a suspiciously quick costume change, squabbled with Seth over irrigation ditches and tax revenues. Isis, meanwhile, was trying to broker a deal, suggesting a joint venture to maximize profits, her voice a honeyed trap. It was a blatant, hilarious lampoon of the ongoing land disputes between powerful noble families, a sacred squabble over earthly gains, all masked by the thin veil of mythology. The audience roared with laughter, recognizing the thinly disguised truth, their amusement a collective wink of complicity.
Suddenly, the female priestess, playing Isis, broke character for a split second. Her eyes, usually fixed on her divine performance, darted toward you, wide with a desperate urgency. "Pharaoh, he's in danger," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the raucous laughter, a fragile thread of sound in a storm of noise. They are poisoning him from within. Help us." Your heart leaped, a falcon taking flight in your chest. This wasn't just a play. This was a coded message, a direct plea for intervention, a secret communique from the divine stage. You instinctively met her gaze, offering a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a silent promise across the footlights. You realized that the actors weren't just performing, they were transmitting vital information, using the guise of mythology to relay urgent political messages, their every gesture a silent semaphore of intrigue, their very performance a cry for help. The climax of the play was truly unexpected. After Osiris's so-called resurrection, Seth wasn't punished. No divine wrath, no eternal torment. Instead, the two gods, mortal enemies in every sacred text, shook hands, a firm, almost businesslike handshake. A mutually beneficial agreement, Seth declared, his voice dripping with false sincerity, a viper's hiss disguised as a blessing. For the good of the kingdom, of course. It was a blatant subversion of the original myth, a sacrilegious twist that screamed of political compromise. Justice was secondary to expediency. Power and compromise, it seemed, were far more important than divine retribution, a new gospel of pragmatism. The audience, surprisingly, applauded wildly, their cheers a thunderclap of approval for pragmatism over piety, and for the chilling new alliance that had just been forged. You spotted the high priest who had directed this entire spectacle. He sat alone in a shadowed alcove, a half-empty cup of barley beer in his hand, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. His smile wasn't one of simple amusement. It was the deep, satisfied smirk of a puppet master, a divine puppeteer who had orchestrated every move, every line, every spontaneous laugh from the audience. He had pulled the strings of gods and mortals alike, his power as vast as the desert itself, his influence as subtle as the shifting sands, a true architect of chaos. He had used the sacred to serve the profane, and he was clearly enjoying every moment of it, a silent conductor of a symphony of deceit. A high official, his face flushed with beer and amusement, sidled up to you. "Just entertainment, right?" he slurred, his words a little thick. His eyes, however, were sharp, piercing through your scholarly facade, as if probing for your understanding. "Oh, absolutely," you replied, your voice surprisingly steady, a steel rod in a velvet glove. "Hilarious, especially the part where the falcon landed on the vizier's shoulder this morning. A real crowd pleaser." His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock, then fear, a sudden crack in his polished mask. He hadn't expected you to know that detail, a private moment from the previous chapter. His casual tone, once a masterpiece of deceptive nonchalance, now shattered, revealing the trap laid with velvet gloves that you had just sidestepped. He wanted to know if you were truly in on the joke, but you had just shown him you were reading the entire script. As the official's composure visibly faltered, a young scribe, pale and disheveled, bumped into you, almost spilling your beer. He mumbled an apology, but his eyes, wide with terror, darted toward the high official, then back to you. As he pulled away, you felt a small, crumpled piece of papyrus slip into your hand, a whisper of paper against your palm. He vanished into the crowd before you could react. The play ended with a crescendo of applause, the audience roaring with laughter, their faces flushed with beer and mirth. But as you looked around, you saw it. The glint in their eyes wasn't just amusement. It was calculation. It was ambition. It was the cold, hard glint of power. The real drama, you realized, wasn't on the stage. It was unfolding in the very lives of these worshippers, a living, breathing political drama where the stakes were not divine favor, but earthly power. The temple was merely the backdrop,
the gods merely puppets, and the audience, they were the true players, their laughter a weapon in the silent war. You clutched the new papyrus, its presence a burning coal in your hand, a silent promise of more secrets, more danger. The game had just begun.
The divine farce on stage continued, a cacophony of staged laughter and feigned piety. But your eyes, now sharpened by the potent barley beer, caught a flicker of movement near the great altar. A high priest, his ceremonial robes still damp from his earlier aquatic antics, exchanged a swift, almost imperceptible nod with a high official, the same one whose face mirrored Seth's smug grin. Their movements were fluid, practiced, shadows slipping into deeper shadows. They didn't announce their departure. They simply evaporated, melting into the opulent tapestry of the temple's grand hall, their exit as smooth and silent as a cobra disappearing into the reeds. Your heart, already a frantic drum, picked up a new, urgent beat. This wasn't part of the show. This was the real show. They vanished behind a massive gold-embroidered linen curtain, a shimmering wall of fabric that seemed to pulse with ancient secrets. You'd assumed it was merely decorative, a grand backdrop for the divine drama unfolding on stage. But a faint, almost inaudible murmur reached your ears from behind the heavy folds, a whisper of forbidden knowledge. Curiosity, that relentless, insatiable beast, clawed at your gut. You had to know. You had to see. Was this just a private conversation, or had you stumbled upon the secret heart of the temple's true purpose? You moved, a phantom in the revelry, weaving through the laughing, drinking crowd. Each step was a calculated risk, a delicate dance of avoidance. You kept your gaze low, your movements fluid, trying to blend into the background, to become as unremarkable as a discarded date pit. You pressed yourself against a cold stone pillar, its surface rough against your cheek, and peered through a narrow gap in the curtain. What you saw confirmed your suspicions. These weren't mere decorations. These were mobile walls, intricate partitions that transformed the vast hall into a labyrinth of hidden meeting rooms, a secret city of whispers. You found your vantage point, nestled behind a colossal statue of Anubis, its jackal head looming like a silent sentinel, its stone ears seemingly attuned to every hushed word. The high priest and the high official stood close, their voices barely above a murmur, yet every word resonated with chilling clarity in your beer-sharpened mind. They weren't discussing sacred rituals or divine blessings. They were talking about a grain shipment, a political negotiation, and the unfortunate necessity of removing a rival official. The Nile's flow is low, the high official stated, his voice devoid of emotion. And the granaries in the southern provinces are underperforming. You understood. Not drought, resource scarcity, a choking grip on the kingdom's lifeblood.
"And the crocodile?" the priest asked, his eyes unblinking, as cold as the desert night. Is he still unwell? The high official nodded slowly. Very. A persistent fever. It seems his influence in the delta is waning. The crocodile, you decoded, was a powerful provincial governor, now weakened, ripe for removal. Their conversation was a masterclass in veiled threats and coded assassinations. Every innocuous phrase a poisoned dart aimed at an unsuspecting target. This wasn't diplomacy. This was corporate espionage, ancient Egyptian style. Suddenly, a different voice, thin and reedy, cut through the hushed tones. Another priest, younger, more nervous, appeared from behind a nearby curtain. He didn't ask about the grain or the crocodile. Instead, he nervously clutched a small clay tablet and asked, "Is the bread of Ra sufficient? Are all the sacred seals intact?" It sounded like a simple query about temple provisions, but the high priest's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "The bread is always sufficient, young one," he replied, his voice laced with an unspoken warning. You knew. Bread of Ra was their code for security. He was asking if anyone had breached their secret meeting, if their sacred sanctuary of secrets had been compromised. Just as your mind raced to process this new layer of deception, a shadow fell over you. You froze. A servant, moving with the silent grace of a desert phantom, stood directly behind you. His eyes, dark and knowing, met yours. There was no alarm, no shout, just a slow, deliberate lowering of his hand, his index finger pressing gently against his lips, a silent command. His gaze held yours for a long, agonizing moment, a thread of unspoken understanding stretching between you. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone, melting back into the shadows, leaving you with the chilling certainty that you had been seen. He was a silent witness, a ghost in the machine, and now so were you. The realization solidified, cold and hard as granite. This wasn't a love festival. It was a covert command center, a secret war room disguised as a holy celebration. Every high priest, every high official, every seemingly innocent participant was a high-ranking operative, and these curtains were their meticulously designed meeting rooms, their clandestine offices for handling the kingdom's dirtiest business. The sacred rituals, the joyous music, the flowing beer, all of it was a brilliant, elaborate smokescreen, a divine distraction to keep the uninitiated from seeing the true machinations of power.
From your new, terrifying vantage point, you overheard another hushed conversation. Two female priestesses, their faces serene and beautiful, were discussing a new spice for the pharaoh's banquet. "It's quite potent," one whispered, her voice like honeyed venom. "A single pinch, and the target will feel unwell. A slow, natural decline. No one will suspect." The other nodded, a chilling smile playing on her lips. "Perfect. The pharaoh's health has been inconveniently robust lately." This wasn't about culinary delight. This was about poison, a silent, deadly weapon disguised as a seasoning, a culinary coup d'etat.
The danger in this temple was far more insidious than you had ever imagined. You retreated from the hidden alcove, your mind reeling, your body trembling. The vibrant sounds of the party, once so inviting, now seemed sinister, a mocking chorus of deception. The laughter of the revelers, once joyous, now sounded hollow, a brittle facade over a gaping abyss. You no longer saw priests and officials enjoying themselves. You saw actors in a deadly play, their faces masks of joviality, their every move a calculated step in a grand, terrifying scheme. They were using the very essence of their sacred beliefs, their ancient rituals, to cloak their ambitions and their murderous designs. The temple, once a beacon of divine power, had become a den of vipers, and you, the unsuspecting archaeologist, had just stumbled into the very heart of their nest.
A booming voice, like a thunderclap across the desert, echoed through the temple, momentarily silencing the revelry. "Behold!" the high priest of Amun boomed, his arms flung wide, his voice a human trumpet announcing royalty. "Presenting the prince of Upper and Lower Egypt, scion of Ra, he who shall lead our glorious kingdom into an even more glorious future." The entire assembly, every high official, every priest, every dignitary, dropped to one knee as if struck by lightning. Except you. You stood there, frozen, a bewildered statue in a sea of prostration. And then he appeared. Not a towering, majestic figure, not a solemn, wise leader. No, a young man, barely out of his teens, sauntered onto the dais. His first act? Not a regal wave, not a profound pronouncement. He was fiddling with his colossal jewel-encrusted collar, adjusting it, preening, as if he were walking a red carpet, not inherit a kingdom. Your jaw dropped. This was the future pharaoh? This was total cringe, a royal PR disaster unfolding in real time, a monument to misplaced confidence. The prince, whose name you later learned was Thutmosis, didn't utter a single solemn word of greeting or gratitude. He made a beeline for a group of high officials, his walk a swaggering peacock strut, and clapped one particularly portly vizier on the back. "You know what I just pulled off?" he crowed, his voice carrying just a little too far, a booming whisper in the sacred hall. "I just convinced a desert tribe to give up 2 sacrificial sheep instead of 1. 2, without even raising my voice. Pure diplomacy, my friend, pure diplomacy." He recounted this trivial anecdote with the puffed-up pride of a general who had just conquered a vast empire, his chest swelling like a hot air balloon of self-importance. You watched, fascinated and horrified. This was a masterclass in overcompensation, a comedy of errors disguised as royal prowess, a symphony of self-aggrandizement. You realized, with a jolt of recognition, that this entire performance was a masterpiece of unintentional satire. The prince, supposedly a brilliant diplomat, was behaving exactly like a teenager trying to impress a girl at a high school dance, bragging about a minor achievement as if it were a Nobel Prize. His attempts to appear sophisticated only highlighted his profound immaturity, his every gesture a neon sign flashing insecure. It was a tragicomic display of inherited power, a stark reminder that even the divine lineage of Ra could produce someone who was, well, kind of a dork. You almost expected him to pull out a scroll with his diplomatic stats and ask for your autograph, a divine LinkedIn profile in the making. He spotted you, an unfamiliar face in the crowd, and his eyes, usually darting around for validation, fixed on you with a sudden, almost predatory curiosity. "And who are you?" he demanded, his voice laced with the condescension of someone born into absolute power. You calmly stated your profession. "An archaeologist, Your Highness." His demeanor shifted instantly, like a chameleon changing colors, from imperious to performatively enthusiastic. "Splendid," he exclaimed, his face lighting up with a forced performative enthusiasm. "I dabble in archaeology myself, you know. Just last month I found the most magnificent rock, a truly ancient rock. It was very rocky." He gestured vaguely, as if describing a hidden treasure map. "Indeed, Your Highness," you replied, your voice a deadpan monotone. "A truly monumental discovery. Perhaps it could be inscribed in the annals of history as the Great Rock of Tutmos. It might even solve the famine." His eyes widened slightly at your suggestion, a flicker of genuine, if misguided, interest. He was so lost in his own self-importance, he couldn't detect the acidic sarcasm dripping from your words, a subtle poison he eagerly swallowed. You watched him work the room, a one-man charm offensive that was more offensive than charming. He moved from group to group, a social butterfly with clipped wings, dispensing exaggerated tales of his achievements. To a group of scribes, he boasted about personally deciphering a complex tax decree, when you knew full well his personal scribe did all the heavy lifting. To a military commander, he claimed to have strategically outmaneuvered a band of desert raiders, when in reality, the raiders had simply gotten lost, victims of their own poor navigation. He was using this party, this love festival, as his personal PR campaign, a royal infomercial designed to solidify his shaky claim to power, a desperate plea for validation.
In a quiet corner, you overheard a venerable high priest, his face a roadmap of ancient wrinkles, muttering under his breath like a disgruntled sphinx. "He should be studying the sacred texts," the old priest grumbled, his voice barely a whisper, "not prattling on about sheep and rocks. A pharaoh needs wisdom, not empty boasts." The prince, with his hyper-tuned ego, somehow caught the last part. He turned, a forced smile plastered on his face. "Ah, wisdom, venerable one. Books are dusty, aren't they? True wisdom comes from doing, from experiencing, from winning." He punctuated his statement with a triumphant, if slightly off-key, laugh, his words a flimsy shield against genuine knowledge. As he spoke, a younger priest, standing nearby, let out a discreet, almost imperceptible hoarse cough, a silent, guttural expression of utter contempt. Later, you saw the prince attempt to impress a stunningly beautiful female priestess, her eyes as deep and mysterious as the Nile itself. He didn't offer her flowers or poetry. Instead, he launched into a detailed account of his strategic brilliance in winning the loyalty of a minor border governor. It was all about leverage, he explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a serpent's hiss of calculated charm. "I offered him a tax exemption for his cattle, and poof, loyalty. Simple, effective." He clearly believed his political acumen was the ultimate aphrodisiac, that his winning strategy would make her swoon. You watched her polite, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes as deep and mysterious as the Nile itself, and knew he was completely missing the mark. a blind man in a field of blooming roses. The most telling detail, however, was the collective reaction of the other high officials and priests. They didn't openly scoff, oh no. Their faces were a masterclass in polite disinterest. They smiled, they nodded, they offered murmured agreements, but their eyes, if you looked closely, held a flicker of weary resignation, a glint of barely suppressed contempt. They were playing along, performing their own roles in this charade, humoring the future king. They were actors in his personal drama, and he, the star, was the only one who didn't realize he was a punchline in his own play. Their forced smiles were as brittle as dried papyrus, ready to crumble at the slightest provocation, a fragile facade over simmering resentment.
A different priest, a younger one, with a more cynical glint in his eye, sidled up to you, a conspiratorial whisper escaping his lips. "He aspires to be a pharaoh, you see," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the preening prince. "But we, the people, the true servants of Egypt, we need a ruler with the wisdom of Thoth, not the bluster of a market vendor. He's more interested in the applause than the actual work. A pharaoh needs to command respect, not beg for it." His words, sharp as a newly forged bronze blade, cut through the superficiality of the party, revealing the deep-seated anxieties about the future of the kingdom, a chilling prophecy from a disillusioned soul. Suddenly, the prince decided to demonstrate his divine connection. He strode to a small ornate altar where a sacred incense burner, shaped like a lotus, sat unlit. "Behold," he announced, his voice booming, "I shall now invoke the blessings of Ra himself to ensure a bountiful harvest." He grabbed a flint and steel, attempting to strike a spark. He struck, and struck, and struck again. Nothing. Just a few pathetic sparks that died instantly. Finally, with a frustrated huff, he managed to produce a meager wisp of smoke, which immediately dispersed, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burnt linen. A few nervous titters rippled through the crowd, quickly suppressed. The prince, oblivious, beamed. Ah, the subtle power of Ra, truly magnificent. It was a pathetic display of incompetence, a royal flop that spoke volumes about his true abilities, a divine comedy of errors. The chapter culminated in a grand toast. The prince, now slightly flushed with beer and self-congratulation, ascended a small ornate pedestal. "To the glory of Egypt," he bellowed, his voice cracking slightly, "and to my brilliant leadership." Everyone, even the weary old priests, raised their cups. But as you looked around, you saw it. The forced smiles, the subtle eye rolls, the barely concealed disdain. Their eyes, once filled with amusement, now held a cold, calculating glint. You realized with a chilling certainty that this prince, for all his inherited power, was not truly respected. He was merely tolerated, a puppet perhaps, waiting for the right strings to be pulled. The future of Egypt, you understood, was not in his hands, but in the calculating gazes of those who pretended to adore him. A kingdom built on sand and lies.
A high priest, his voice now booming with a forced, almost theatrical cheer,
cut through the temple's buzzing cacophony. "Behold, noble guests," he roared, his arms flung wide as if embracing the entire cosmos, a human billboard for divine matchmaking. "The moment you've all been waiting for. The sacred love rituals have begun. Today the gods themselves shall weave the threads of destiny, uniting lonely souls." Your stomach lurched, a startled scarab in your gut. You expected solemn vows, perhaps a gentle, symbolic pairing, something out of a romantic papyrus scroll. Instead, he unfurled a massive scroll, its surface not covered in ancient prayers, but in neat, meticulously organized columns. It was a spreadsheet of pre-arranged matches, a divine dating app where the algorithms were centuries old and dictated by lineage and land ownership, not mutual interests. The lonely souls were already meticulously destined for each other, their futures sealed tighter than a sarcophagus lid. This wasn't romance. This was arranged marriage, ancient Egyptian style, with a side of divine endorsement, a cosmic corporate merger. The tension, thick as the temple's incense, was palpable, a suffocating blanket of unspoken expectations. The first ritual was called divine mark recognition. It sounded profound, spiritual, like something out of a forgotten prophecy. In reality, it was a glorified speed dating game show, but with much higher stakes than a free dinner. Each guest was handed a small, polished stone, intricately carved with the symbol of a minor deity, a fertility goddess, a harvest god, a god of wealth. Your task was to find the person whose stone, when placed next to yours, created a harmonious divine pairing. You quickly realized the symbols weren't random. They were meticulously assigned, ensuring that powerful families were paired with other powerful families, wealthy merchants with influential officials. It was a cosmic jigsaw puzzle of political alliances, each piece carefully selected to form a stronger, more formidable whole. You watched the young, nervous scribe fumble with his stone, trying desperately to match it with a high official's daughter, his face a roadmap of anxiety, his hopes as fragile as a dried lotus petal. A grizzled old general, his uniform still smelling faintly of battle, was paired with a lithe young woman whose family owned a strategic quartz mine. He grunted, a sound like grinding millstones, and she offered a brittle, polite smile.
Next came the talent display for divine favor. It was essentially an open mic night, but with much higher stakes, a gladiatorial arena of performance. Guests were encouraged to perform a talent to attract their destined partner. A beautiful female priestess, her voice like liquid gold, began to sing. Her song was ostensibly about the enduring power of love, but the lyrics, if you listened closely, were riddled with subtle boasts about her family's vast land holdings, their thriving cattle herds, and their impressive collection of rare lapis lazuli. It was a musical resume, a serenade of financial assets disguised as a love ballad. The men in the audience, particularly the older, wealthier ones, nodded approvingly, their eyes gleaming with something far more practical than affection, a calculating glint of potential profit. Another performer, a minor official, attempted a juggling act with sacred ankhs,
only to drop them all with a clatter. Yet his destined partner, a high priestess whose brother controlled the Nile's irrigation, applauded vigorously, her smile as fake as a painted mummy. You witnessed a high official, his waistline expanding with every passing year and every successful negotiation, attempting to woo a strikingly young female priestess. He didn't speak of her beauty or grace. Instead, he launched into a detailed, self-congratulatory monologue about his experience in managing the royal granaries, his unparalleled success in negotiating trade deals with Nubian tribes, and his proven ability to increase the pharaoh's personal wealth. He clearly believed that his financial prowess was the ultimate aphrodisiac, that his spreadsheet of achievements would make her swoon. You watched her polite, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes as unreadable as ancient hieroglyphics, and knew he was completely missing the mark. She looked bored, her gaze drifting towards the temple ceiling, perhaps counting the painted stars, her thoughts a million miles away from his boasts. Then came the race to the Temple of Love, a bizarre, ceremonial foot race around the temple grounds. Couples already paired by the divine mark recognition had to run together, hand in hand, to a small, ornate shrine dedicated to Hathor, the goddess of love. It was ostensibly a test of devotion and unity. In reality, it was a display of physical prowess and stamina, a way for families to showcase the health and vitality of their offspring, crucial factors in selecting a suitable spouse. You saw a particularly portly vizier paired with a lithe young woman, puffing and wheezing as he struggled to keep up, his face a beetroot of exertion, his every step a testament to his sedentary lifestyle. His destined partner looked less impressed and more like she was considering a swift, strategic escape, her gaze fixed on the exit, a silent plea for liberation. You found yourself unexpectedly drawn into a game called The Oracle's Path. A stunning woman, her eyes like pools of dark water, approached you. "Can we find the path to the Temple of Love?" she asked, her voice a low, husky whisper. You knew she wasn't just talking about a physical temple. This was a coded invitation, a subtle probe for your intentions, a test of your willingness to engage in the deeper game. Her question wasn't about romance. It was about alliance, about finding a path to shared influence and power. You considered your reply carefully, knowing that a single wrong word could either open doors or seal your fate. "The path to any true temple," you replied, your voice steady, "is rarely found on a map. It's built on trust, and perhaps a few well-placed secrets." Her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise. Then her hand brushed yours, and a small, intricately carved amulet, shaped like a scarab beetle, was pressed into your palm. "Not all paths lead to love," she whispered, her voice chillingly clear. "Some lead to the tomb." She melted back into the crowd, leaving you with the cold metal of the amulet and a new, unsettling mystery. In a secluded alcove, partially hidden by a swaying curtain, you observed two powerful families engaged in what appeared to be a heated, yet hushed negotiation. They weren't discussing love or devotion. They were talking about unifying our houses and solidifying our political alliance through the marriage of their children. Her dowry includes 3 fertile plots near the delta, one patriarch stated, his voice flat and businesslike, a merchant closing a deal. And his family controls the stone quarries for the next 2 generations, the other countered, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The love rituals were merely the backdrop, the sacred camouflage for what was essentially a high-stakes corporate merger. This entire festival was a sophisticated matchmaking service, a marriage market, where human hearts were merely pawns in a larger game of power and prestige. The air in that corner was thick with the scent of ambition, a perfume of calculated futures, a fragrant shroud over human transactions. You noticed a chilling detail. Those who remained unmatched or undesirable were subtly yet effectively isolated. They weren't overtly shunned, but they were excluded from the games, ignored in conversations, their presence fading into the background like ghosts at their own funeral. It was a silent, brutal mechanism of social control, a way for ancient Egyptian society to maintain its rigid hierarchy and consolidate power. The gods had spoken, and their judgment was absolute, a silent decree of social exile. A gaunt, elderly scribe, his robes frayed, approached you, his eyes hollow. "They say the gods choose us," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper of despair. "But the gods, my friend, only choose those with the biggest granaries or the sharpest knives. My daughter, she was chosen by a god of poverty." He vanished, leaving behind the bitter tang of his unspoken tragedy.
A high priest, the same one who had offered you the potent barley beer, approached you, a knowing glint in his eye. "Do you see now?" he murmured, his voice a low conspiratorial rumble, a serpent's hiss of shared understanding. "Our love is built on power. Our passion is measured in land and gold. The gods, they simply provide the blessing, the divine rubber stamp for what we already decided." He chuckled, a dry, cynical sound that held no mirth, a laugh devoid of joy. It was a sarcastic commentary on the very foundation of their society, a bitter truth disguised as a casual observation. His words were a dagger of insight, piercing through the illusion of romance, a chilling revelation. He offered you another cup of beer, his gesture an unspoken invitation to join their ranks of cynical understanding, to drink from the well of disillusioned truth. The chapter culminated in a grand final toast. The newly formed couples, their faces flushed with beer and a mix of triumph and resignation, raised their cups. Everyone smiled, a collective mask of forced joviality, their expressions as brittle as dried clay. But as you looked into their eyes, you saw it, the calculated glint of ambition, the weary acceptance of their fate, the unspoken secrets buried beneath layers of ancient ceremony.
You knew that behind those smiles, behind the grand pronouncements of divine love, lay only cold, hard calculations and the silent, unspoken knowledge of deals struck, alliances forged, and lives irrevocably bound by something far more potent than love, power. You clutched the scarab amulet in your hand, its cool surface a reminder of the warning you'd received. The love rituals were over, but the true game, you realized, had only just begun.
The temple throbbed, a living, breathing drum of revelry. Laughter pealed, music swelled, and the clinking of clay cups was a constant joyous symphony. You were caught in the swirling vortex of the love rituals, watching a high priestess attempt a truly terrible juggling act with sacred ankhs, while her destined partner cheered her on with the enthusiasm of a man who had just won the lottery. The air was thick with the scent of fermented barley and ambition, a heady perfume of chaos. Suddenly, a hush fell. Not a gradual fade, but an abrupt, bone-chilling silence, as if the very gods themselves had slammed their hands down on the party. Every head snapped towards the grand entrance. There, framed by the colossal pillars, stood an ancient high priest, his face a mask of granite disapproval, his eyes twin chips of obsidian. He was the high priest of Karnak, a man whose piety was legendary, whose very presence could curdle milk. He didn't move, he simply stood, a living statue of judgment, his gaze sweeping across the debauched scene, a silent, scorching flame. The music died, the laughter evaporated. The party, in that instant, flatlined. His voice, when it came, was not a roar, but a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the temple, a divine bass note of condemnation. "What," he intoned, each syllable a hammer blow against the revelry, "what have you done to this sacred place? This is not a marketplace for your petty desires. This is not a tavern for your drunken antics. This is the house of Amun-Ra. This is where we honor the divine, not defile it." He gestured around the hall, his hand sweeping over the scattered cups, the disheveled robes, the lingering scent of illicit pleasures. His words were meant to sting, to shame, to bring them all to their knees in repentance. He was trying to call them back to order, to remind them of the sanctity they had so brazenly trampled. But the party-goers, fueled by the potent brew and a newfound rebellious freedom, merely blinked. A young official, his face still flushed with beer and the thrill of the love rituals, broke the terrified silence. He swayed slightly, then offered a wide, disarming grin. "But, venerable one, surely the gods enjoy a good party too? Do you wish for them to be bored? Do you think Ra prefers silence to song? Do you believe Hathor frowns upon enthusiasm?" A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the crowd, growing momentum. It was a direct challenge, a sacrilegious jest aimed at the very heart of the old priest's authority. The audacity was breathtaking, a defiant spark in the suffocating silence.
The old priest's face, already a storm cloud, darkened like a brewing tempest. He raised his staff, a gnarled piece of ebony carved with ancient symbols, and began to chant a low, guttural curse, his voice rising in a desperate crescendo. He was trying to invoke divine wrath, to summon the very fury of the gods to quell this insolence. But his words, ancient and powerful, were quickly swallowed by the resurgence of the party.
The musicians, emboldened by the young official's defiance, struck up a louder, more raucous tune. The laughter swelled, a tsunami of mirth that drowned out the priest's desperate incantations. He looked like a man trying to extinguish a raging inferno with a single cup of water, his efforts utterly, tragically futile. You realized with a chilling clarity that you were witnessing a clash of titans, not of gods, but of ideologies. On one side, the rigid, unyielding tradition, embodied by the old priest, who believed that religion was solemn, sacred, and unchanging. On the other, the young, adaptable generation, who saw religion as a flexible framework, a vibrant part of life, ready to be bent and reshaped to suit their desires. It was a generational war, fought not with chariots and arrows, but with laughter and defiance. The temple, once a symbol of unwavering faith, had become a battleground of beliefs, its very stones vibrating with the tension. The old priest's gaze, filled with a profound disappointment that felt almost personal, landed on you. His eyes, two burning embers of despair, seemed to bore into your very soul. He didn't speak, but his look was a silent question. You are an archaeologist. You understand the weight of history, the sanctity of these ancient ways. Do you not see what is happening? Do you not understand this sacrilege? You felt a pang of guilt, a sharp, unexpected jab to your conscience. You were caught between two worlds, two opposing forces, a lone boat adrift in a raging sea of change. Your knowledge of the past made you an unwilling witness to its desecration, a silent accomplice to its downfall. You saw Prince Thutmose, still flushed with beer and self-congratulation, completely oblivious to the old priest's fury. He continued to laugh, to drink, to boast, his voice a booming bass drum of self-importance. He was utterly unconcerned, his attention fixed on a group of giggling female priestesses. He was a living embodiment of defiance, a direct, unwitting challenge to the very authority the old priest represented. His ignorance was his shield, his arrogance his armor, making him impervious to divine wrath.
Another priest, younger than the old one, but clearly still respecting his position, approached the fuming elder. He placed a calming hand on the old priest's arm. "Venerable one," he murmured, his voice a soothing balm, "this is merely another ritual, a way to honor the gods through joy, through celebration. Is not happiness also a form of worship?" His words, seemingly conciliatory, were a masterpiece of theological gymnastics, twisting ancient doctrine to justify modern indulgence. It revealed the inherent flexibility, the slippery slope of interpretation within the very religious system the old priest sought to protect. This wasn't just a party, it was a theological loophole exploited with gleeful abandon. The old priest, defeated, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his unheeded warnings, finally turned and walked away. He didn't storm out. He simply faded into the shadows, a ghost of tradition retreating from the overwhelming tide of modernity. His departure went largely unnoticed, a silent acknowledgment of his irrelevance. The party, a hydra of hedonism, immediately swelled back to its full, raucous volume, as if his brief appearance had been nothing more than a momentary dip in the music, a minor hiccup in the grand symphony of debauchery. The party raged on, even wilder now, as if to spite the old priest's condemnation. But in your eyes, it was no longer a joyous celebration. It was a fever dream of excess, a symbol of decay. You saw the laughter as brittle, the music as discordant, the very air thick with unspoken truths and impending doom. It was a chilling tableau of a civilization in flux, a warning etched in the very fabric of the temple. The sacred had been desacralized, the traditional had been trivialized, and the ancient order was crumbling, brick by painful brick, under the relentless assault of human desire and political ambition. This wasn't just a party, it was a funeral pyre for an era, burning brightly in the heart of Thebes.
The sun, a vengeful eye of Ra, stabbed through the temple's high windows, piercing your eyelids with brutal efficiency. Your head throbbed, a drum solo of regret echoing behind your eyes, each beat a painful reminder of the night's forgotten acrobatics. Every muscle ached, protesting the contorted positions you'd found yourself in, the impromptu dances, the desperate attempts to decipher coded jokes. You groaned, a sound that felt ancient, primal, a muffled cry from a forgotten tomb, and opened your eyes to a blurry, disorienting world. You were sprawled in a cool, shadowed corner of the grand hall, your linen robes twisted around you like a discarded mummy wrapping, smelling faintly of stale beer and desperation. Beside you, a colossal statue of Anubis, the jackal-headed god, loomed like a silent, judgmental bouncer. His stone eyes, usually so impassive, seemed to hold a knowing glint, almost a sly wink, as if he'd witnessed every single scandalous moment of the love rituals and was now silently judging your life choices. You swore he was suppressing a chuckle. Was this divine judgment, or just a particularly bad hangover? Probably both. The temple, once a vibrant, chaotic symphony, was now a graveyard of hushed whispers and awkward movements. Priests, their elaborate wigs askew, some even missing a few precious braids, stumbled around, trying to reassemble their dignity like broken pottery shards, each piece a shattered fragment of their former piety. High officials, their faces pale beneath layers of coal, meticulously wiped away suspicious smudges of lipstick or smudged eye paint, their movements stiff, almost robotic, a clumsy ballet of damage control. One venerable high priest, whose ceremonial beard had somehow become tangled with a stray lotus petal, was meticulously adjusting his elaborate headdress, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes darting around as if expecting divine retribution to strike at any moment. They moved with the forced grace of actors who had forgotten their lines but were determined to finish the play. A masterclass in collective denial, a performance of normality so intense it almost felt real, a fragile illusion against the harsh light of dawn. The air, no longer thick with frankincense and beer, now carried the stale, clinging scent of last night's excess. Dried sweat, spilled wine, and a faint metallic tang that you didn't want to identify, a lingering ghost of debauchery. Everyone was talking, but their conversations were strangely muted, almost rehearsed, a chorus of forced pleasantries. "The harvest looks promising this year," one vizier murmured to another, his voice as flat as a desert plain, his eyes carefully avoiding contact. "Indeed, thanks to the blessings of Ra," the other replied, his gaze fixed on a distant pillar, as if seeking divine guidance on how to avoid a hangover. They spoke of the weather, of crop yields, of mundane administrative duties, all the important matters that had been so gleefully ignored just hours before. It was a thin veneer of civility,
a fragile shield against the truth, a collective amnesia they desperately clung to. You knew with chilling certainty that all the whispered secrets, all the illicit deals, all the scandalous agreements forged under the influence of barley beer were now buried deep beneath a mountain of polite lies, a silent tomb of forgotten transgressions. You spotted Prince Tutmos, the scion of Ra, the self-proclaimed diplomatic genius, was sprawled unceremoniously on a cushioned bench, his jewel-encrusted collar askew, one sandal missing, and his mouth slightly ajar. He was muttering in sleep, something about 2 sacrificial sheep and pure diplomacy, his words a drunken lullaby of self-congratulation. He looked less like the future pharaoh and more like a toddler who'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar, his face a picture of innocent, albeit slightly sticky, slumber. His personal guard, a burly Nubian warrior, stood over him, his expression a mixture of weary resignation and profound embarrassment. Even the stone-faced sentinel couldn't hide his disdain for his sleeping charge, a silent judgment etched on his weathered face. As you cautiously pushed yourself upright, your foot nudged something small and hard. You looked down. It was a crumpled piece of papyrus, half hidden beneath a discarded linen napkin. Your heart gave a sudden sharp lurch, a startled bird in your chest. This wasn't just any scrap. This was the very scroll you'd seen the high official meticulously scribbling on last night, the one containing the adjustments to the grain tithes. You picked it up, your fingers trembling. Unfurling it, you saw a list, not of grain figures, but of names. A list of officials, scribes, and even a few minor priests, each name followed by a cryptic symbol. A rising sun, an alliance with Ra, perhaps a reward of power. A blossoming lotus, a promise of wealth, a share in the spoils. And most chillingly, a coiled snake, a veiled threat, a promise of revenge, or perhaps a secret society. You instantly understood. This wasn't a tax adjustment. This was a promotion roster, a hit list of rising stars, meticulously planned and executed under the cover of sacred revelry. The sacred seals were indeed intact, but they were sealing fates, not just documents. This scroll was a ticking bomb, a roadmap to power and betrayal, and you held it in your trembling hand. A high priest, his robes impeccably straightened, his face a mask of serene piety, approached you. His eyes, however, held a knowing glint, a spark of shared memory, a silent acknowledgment of the night's transgressions. "A vivid dream, was it not?" he murmured, his voice smooth as polished stone, a deceptive balm over a festering wound. "The gods often speak to us in slumber. Do not dwell on the phantoms of the night. It is best to let such visions remain ethereal." His words were not a question. They were a veiled command, a gentle warning to forget, to deny, to erase the memory of last night's debauchery. He was offering you an out, a chance to rejoin the collective delusion, to pretend that nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. His smile was as thin as a desert mirage, promising peace, but hiding a deeper truth, a silent threat disguised as a blessing. Just as the high priest turned to walk away, a young scribe, the same one who had slipped you the secret papyrus in the previous chapter, brushed past you. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror
that seemed to vibrate in the very air around him. He didn't stop, didn't even look directly at you, but his voice, a frantic, almost inaudible whisper, reached your ears. You have seen what you should not have seen. These walls have ears, archaeologist, and they hear everything. He vanished into the crowd, leaving you with his chilling warning, a cold blade of fear piercing through your hangover. The temple, once a sanctuary, now felt like a giant, whispering ear, every shadow a potential spy, every murmur a hidden threat. You watched a temple servant, his face impassive, meticulously scrubbing a dark, sticky stain from the mosaic floor. It wasn't just a stain. It was a deep crimson smear, like dried wine, but with an unsettling, almost metallic sheen. Perhaps it was the ghost of a spilled secret, the residue of a heated argument, the faint echo of a forbidden agreement. He worked with a quiet intensity, erasing the physical evidence of the night's transgressions, as if by removing the stain he could also erase the memory. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic, a silent act of absolution, a daily ritual of denial. You wondered how many such stains he had cleaned over the years, how many secrets he had helped to bury beneath the temple's polished surface, a silent chronicler of the unseen. In a hushed corner, almost hidden by a towering pillar, a woman, her face still flushed with the afterglow of beer and illicit passion, quietly slipped a heavy gold armlet onto a man's wrist. It wasn't a gift of affection. It was a transaction, a silent exchange of power, a deal struck in the shadows, sealed not with a kiss, but with the clink of precious metal, a cold, hard contract of ambition. The man's eyes, cold and calculating, met hers, a brief, knowing glance that spoke volumes about the true nature of their connection. This wasn't love. This was leverage, a bargain struck in the temple of ambition, a silent, golden chain of influence. The forced solemnity of the morning was a fragile facade, a flimsy papyrus curtain drawn across the raw, pulsating reality of the night before. You saw the frantic efforts of the priests and officials to reassert their dignity, to pretend that the temple had always been this hushed, this reverent. A high priestess adjusted her elaborate wig. A vizier picked up a dropped jewel-encrusted goblet. A newly matched couple awkwardly avoided eye contact. But the lingering scent of beer, the faint echoes of laughter, the subtle shifts in their gazes, they all betrayed the truth. This wasn't just a party that had gotten out of hand. This was a silent war, fought with whispers and winks, with coded jokes and strategic alliances, where the only casualties were truth and innocence. The temple, once a beacon of divine order, had become a stage for human deceit, a grand illusion of piety, a gilded cage of conspiracy. You stepped out of the temple, the harsh morning sun a blinding revelation, a spotlight on your new reality. The sounds of the city, once a comforting hum, now seemed distant, muffled, as if you were walking through water, a phantom in your own world. The images of the night, the laughing priests, the plotting officials, the love rituals that were anything but, burned themselves into your mind like fresh hieroglyphics, an indelible tattoo on your soul. You knew with a chilling certainty that no ancient text, no dusty scroll, no archaeological excavation could ever truly capture the raw, unfiltered truth of what you had witnessed. You had stepped into their world, a world of hidden agendas and sacred deceptions, and now you were inextricably bound to it. There was no going back. Your life, your career, your understanding of history, all of it had been irrevocably altered. You were no longer just an archaeologist. You were a keeper of forbidden knowledge, a witness to the scandalous truth, and the story, you realized, had only just begun.
The morning sun, a fiery disk in the pale sky, promised a new day, but for you, it felt like the dawn of a terrifying new reality. You moved like a ghost through the temple, a phantom in a waking nightmare, desperate to escape the lingering stench of stale beer and fresh deceit. Every step was a silent prayer for anonymity, a desperate plea to simply vanish into the bustling streets of Thebes. You thought you were free. You thought you had witnessed enough. But just as the grand pylon gates, gaping mouths of ancient stone, beckoned with the promise of escape, a voice, smooth as polished granite, yet sharp as a newly honed blade, stopped you cold. Leaving so soon, archaeologist? It was the high official, the one whose face mirrored Seth's smug grin, the architect of last night's divine farce. He materialized beside you, his linen robes pristine, his coal-lined eyes twin pools of unsettling calm. He offered no pleasantries, no false inquiries about your well-being. Instead, his hand, surprisingly strong, gripped your arm, a silent, unyielding manacle. He didn't speak of the party, of the drunken revelry, of the whispered deals. He simply extended his other hand, and in it lay not a papyrus scroll, but a small, intricately carved obsidian scarab, its surface cool and smooth against your skin. It was a beautiful thing, almost mesmerizing, yet it felt heavy, a tiny black hole of unspoken weight. A token of our appreciation, he murmured, his voice a low purr that sent a shiver down your spine. A memento of our shared understanding. You looked at the scarab, then back at him. His eyes, twin chips of polished obsidian, held yours. Some secrets, once witnessed, become permanent attachments, wouldn't you agree? His words were not a question, they were a veiled threat, a velvet-gloved fist around your throat. He was telling you in no unturned terms that you were now inextricably linked to their world, a fly caught in a spider's web of ancient intrigue. The air around him seemed to thicken, a palpable cloak of menace.
You understood. This obsidian scarab wasn't a gift. It was a brand, a mark of complicity. You had seen too much, heard too much, deciphered too much. Your life as a detached academic poring over dusty texts was over. You were no longer an observer. You were a player, whether you wanted to be or not. A pawn in a game you barely understood. The thought sent a jolt of terror through you, cold and sharp as a serpent's fang. But beneath the fear, a strange, almost exhilarating thrill began to bubble.
This was the stuff of legends, the kind of discovery that made careers if it didn't end them. Your mind raced, a chariot out of control. One side screamed for safety, for escape, for the quiet anonymity of your Luxor apartment. The other, the archaeologist deep within you, yearned for the forbidden knowledge, the untold stories, the chance to peel back the layers of history that no one else dared touch. It was a battle for your soul, a tug of war between common sense and insatiable curiosity. You knew with a chilling certainty that if you refused, if you tried to walk away, your life would be forfeit. They wouldn't just let you go. You were a loose end, a ticking bomb of information. Just then, as if summoned by the very tension in the air, a magnificent falcon, its wings a blur of bronze and gold in the morning light, descended from the temple's towering pylons. It landed, with a soft flutter, directly on the high official's shoulder. Its eyes, twin points of burning amber, fixed on you. It wasn't just a bird. It was a living symbol of Horus, the sky god, the protector of the pharaoh, the avenger of his father. The official merely smiled, a slow, knowing smile, stroking the falcon's head. "Horus watches over us all," he murmured, his voice now imbued with the chilling, almost divine authority. "He sees everything." The message was clear. You were being watched by gods and men. This wasn't just a physical threat. It was a spiritual one. A divine warning that echoed through the very fabric of the cosmos.
You realized, with a sudden, breathtaking clarity, that your adventure had only just begun. The love festival in Thebes was merely an opening act, a small ripple in a vast ocean of intrigue. This scarab, this new invitation, was a portal to a much larger, darker world of ancient Egypt, a world of shadow pharaohs who ruled from behind the scenes, of high priests who wielded political power like a sacred weapon, of hidden cults and ancient conspiracies that stretched back to the very dawn of civilization. It was a world where loyalty was bought with gold and sealed with blood, where secrets were more valuable than life itself, and where the gods themselves were merely pawns in a cosmic game of chess. The internal struggle ceased. A cold, hard resolve settled in your gut, a stone of grim determination. You looked at the obsidian scarab in your hand, its smooth, dark surface reflecting the rising sun. It was a key, yes, but also a shackle, a golden cage of destiny. You couldn't refuse, not now, not when the stakes were so high, not when the truth was so tantalizingly close. To turn back would be to invite certain death, or worse, a life haunted by the knowledge of what you had almost discovered. You would play their game. You would unravel their secrets. You would survive. You met the high official's gaze, your own eyes now holding a glint of defiance, a spark of unexpected fire. You offered a slow, deliberate nod. "Our secrets," you stated, your voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within, "are perfectly safe with me." He smiled, a genuine, almost appreciative smile this time, a rare glimpse of humanity in a sea of calculation. He understood. You had accepted the challenge. You had chosen your fate. You turned and walked away from the temple, the obsidian scarab clutched tightly in your hand. The city of Thebes, once a place of ancient wonders, now felt like a mere stepping stone on a much larger, more perilous journey. Before you stretched the vast, endless expanse of the desert, a golden ocean of mystery, beckoning with the promise of unseen temples, forgotten cities, and even deeper secrets. You were no longer just an archaeologist. You were an unwilling participant, an unreluctant hero in an ancient thriller. And the story, you knew, had only just begun. Its next chapter, written in sand and blood. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through time, uncovering the scandalous secrets of ancient Egypt. I hope this story left you both curious and entertained. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. See you on our next adventure.